So as a child, I remember singing the hymn, "Shall We Gather at the River," in my grandparents' old Baptist church. To me, the words reminded me that I was not alone. It's not "shall I gather at the river," but rather "shall we gather." I see this as a focus on the power of covenant. For the past 2 years, I have served this association of congregations as a commissioner on the Commission on Appraisal. That is a group of clergy and lay-led representatives elected by voting members of what we call our General Assembly. And it is an organization, or commission rather, that is independent of our association's Board of Trustees. The task of the commission is to investigate a particular topic of interest of the association and report back to the General Assembly through a publication, all of our findings. This year, we have just published the results of a 4-year investigation on covenants and how we as an association of congregations use them, don't use them, follow them, break them, repair them, and everything in between. I wanted to share with you today some of our results of the valuable work. It's important to remember that our faith tradition, we have a history in the Christian faith, but we rejected the Universalists and Unitarians and general Christian practice of adopting creeds to bind us together. Instead, we leaned into a history of covenantal relationships to guide how we are and how we want to be together. Essentially, we believe our deeds are more important than any one belief. For me, as a liberal faith leader who looks to the life of Jesus as a pattern of navigating the world, I personally feel that our way of interpreting life is pretty much the most truly Christian thing I've seen. And we're not. But the amazing concepts here is that we do not require restrictive beliefs of our members, but instead we offer ourselves and each other mutually agreeable ways of being together. It's a really cool method of navigating even our personal life. Now, some may say that there is a troublesome current of wokeness or cancel culture permeating Unitarian Universalist faith right now. But what I'm hoping today's service will demonstrate is that our belief and display in covenants is incredibly important. And instead, I hope to shed light on what I see as the true problem of our faith today: an overindulgence of our individuality while refusing to care for the larger whole. Now, this just isn't a UU dilemma. We are all living in a very real issue of individuality over community building right now with the COVID pandemic. We can't, even with multiple safe and effective vaccines, we can't get our act together as a country. Now, I am not much for the word sin, but its original conceptual origin story is from archery, and it simply means to miss the mark. That I can get with. So if there is such a thing as sin, this overemphasis of self at the detriment of community would definitely be it for me. But we, as a faith tradition, can embrace the power of covenants. Our chair, the Reverend Carol Thomas Sissel, shares this in our opening. A covenant is a mutual sacred promise between individuals or groups to stay in relationship, care about each other, and work together in good faith. In our tradition, we seek to raise the we above the I, the community above the individual. I think it's important to remind ourselves that we are an association of congregations. We are not a denomination like other faiths. All of our congregations 100% govern themselves. Now, it is true that annually we gather representatives from all of these disparate congregations to meet at what we call our General Assembly to do the work of our larger collective faith movement. But at the end of the day, the authority of our missions and visions reside squarely at the congregational level. Our involvement in this association is a covenantal act, one which affirms the 7 principles that if you're a UU, you are familiar with. If you're new today, drop by the visitors table. We'll talk to you about those principles. But essentially, we are not an ecclesiastical faith with various hierarchical levels of authority like bishops and cardinals or popes. Simply put, your individual vote in congregational meetings is an act of faith and an observation of covenant between you and your fellow community members. And the votes at our General Assembly by those representatives is what we refer to as the Unitarian Universalist Association. While our association has a board president and a board and a president and offices in Boston, there is no one dictating anything to individual congregations, but rather those who take time out of their personal schedule to represent their congregation at our annual meetings. These are the ways we exercise free and fair democratic processes within our association, and it guides our faith to the future. Now, this may result in actions taken by the General Assembly or commissions like the Commission on Appraisal, for which we as individuals may not be in alignment. This is the complexity of a covenant, a diminishing of self for the greater collection of lives. In fact, in our work, the Commission on Appraisal interviewed 82 congregational representatives, and we found that when we asked about the disadvantages of bringing up covenants within their community, 19% of those congregations who actually had covenants in place still indicated that there were individualistic people within their community that really had a problem with the construct of covenant. Now, our sample size was not statistically relevant, so we have to be very careful about drawing conclusions to the greater faith. That's my science out there for y'all. But of our sample, this was an observation made. Additionally, 38% of those congregations who did not have covenants in place also identified that same strain of individualism as a reason for the disapproval of bringing up covenants within their midst. Our work also indicated that overwhelmingly 77% of the leadership, like the boards, the board reps within the congregations, the lay leaders of committees, and the congregations as a whole through congregational voting or congregational meetings, were willing to sit with the discomfort of reduced individualism while uplifting the regular covenant as a way to affirm care for the community. This is overwhelmingly wonderful news, I think. It means that even within our very disparate and independent congregations, we do seem to share the value that covenant is a powerful tool. Similarly, in those in our midst who are individualist and spiritually wounded, they collectively, 26%, represented 26% of our respondents, and they disapproved of regular use and reference of their very own covenants. So this tension of sitting in the discomfort of the loss of individualism while uplifting the needs of community, that's difficult for anyone. As a queer man, I have felt the sting of having entire swaths of a larger population deny my 20-year marriage and my right to it. I also am old enough to have witnessed the hideous insensitivity to my community during the AIDS epidemics of the 80s and 90s, and even the HIV stigma that still continues to this day. I understand what it feels like to have to acquiesce to the pressures of a larger group that may feel like it is discounting my own lived individual experience. However, I see a big difference between our current association's controversies of accepting racial reconciliation and trans people identity affirmation and the hate-mongering of the 80s and the marriage equality movement of the 2000s. Our associational and congregational commitment to racial and trans inclusion work is an expansion of the spirit of love expressed in our faith tradition. I have to routinely remind myself that the loss of a privilege or a position of power can often sometimes feel like discrimination. Perhaps some of you are also concerned about the loss of individual opinion and position as this congregation continues the journey forward in combating racial and trans oppression. I wholeheartedly invite you to participate in the racially caucused groups like the True Colors group, The Journey Toward Wholeness, where we as white-identified individuals work without shame and blame to empower us in these efforts, or perhaps the equivalent Black, Indigenous, and People of Color group led by Reverend Leslie, where BIPOC folk support one another on issues they face as a result of oppression. I also will welcome you to set up a time to talk directly to either me or Reverend Leslie if you want. It's very important that we all keep working toward better understanding our individual place within this community. This type of individual exploration and reconciliation is so important. It will strengthen our own perspectives while helping to lift up our greater community. Now, the work on the Commission of Appraisal is very important and relevant to keeping our faith tradition alive and growing. Covenants, I believe, are very critical to the survival of our congregations, and they serve as ways to strengthen the vision and missions of our individual groups while binding us together as a larger association of faith. We are very well poised to be a welcoming and affirming faith to a multitude of individuals and beliefs if we get this right. Our commission's work affirms that there is indeed a power in embracing covenants. And I would like to just share with you the high-level power that we think are present in the covenants themselves. So we really do feel that if we embrace our religious heritage of being a covenantal faith and non-creedal, that we are in a better position to bring about or foster that idyllic, beloved community that you often hear about. But the covenants are just a tool that we use for community building. And there are some aspects that we feel are really vital to their correct and powerful implementation. So they first have to be alive. They have to be living. This means they have to be evaluated and reevaluated periodically. MDUUC's Covenant of Right Relations has just recently undergone a congregational approval in January of this year, making us a congregation of people that definitely implement a living aspect to covenant. Covenants are also practical. This means that we shouldn't be afraid in applying our covenants to create a more appropriate and inclusive commonwealth of mutuality. Covenants, much like the 4 agreements specified by Sharon this morning in our call to worship, hold all of us into account for our actions and our words. When I damage the community, I must be held to account. After all, I agreed to the covenant to begin with. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm not at a lecture series at Berkeley down the road. I'm in a faith tradition and community where I want to build relationships. It isn't about shame and blame. It is about building something better. Now, I feel shame sometimes. Okay, I feel shame a lot of the times. That's okay. that's for me. I use that as a trigger for myself that says, hey, whatever just happened, there's something deeper there you need to take a peek at. And then I go away, and I find myself a minister, a trusted friend, a colleague, a therapist. That's where I go. And I do that work. I dig through. I find out, what's that about? And then, when I'm ready, I return, and I bridge my covenant. I recognize that I did something that broke the community to which I belong, and I repair that rupture. This brings us to the final point that the commission would like to lift up, and that is that covenants should be ritualized and embodied. This is a way to make us all familiar with our own covenants. So a lot of times in our research, what we found is people will post their covenant on a wall, and then they never reference their covenant again until maybe the annual meeting in their congregation. But if you asked any of their congregants, they would not be able to tell you anything about the covenant that binds their group of people together. We need to ritualize and embody these covenants. We are a covenantal faith. It's the only thing we have, y'all. We don't have creeds. We got to have something. So when the community affirms love, and that love is expansive and not constricting, that's where the power is. And an embodied and ritualized attempt at remembering our covenant and applying it consistently can really be a powerful tool. For me, when I'm in any of the community places that I navigate, I see that I have agreed to be in covenant with those people. And I do feel that when I feel discomfort with a particular request or statement or something that has happened, I really just investigate my heart. And I say, what is being asked of me? Maybe someone is asking me to use they as pronouns. Is that ask expanding love? If I don't do what they're asking, am I restricting love? That's how I guide my decision. So if I'm being asked to expand love and lean into the spirit of life that we so often sing and profess, then that helps me answer the question about being in covenant with that person. There is a wonderful author and minister, John Pavlovitz, that I really, really respect a lot. And he just published a new book that I cannot wait to read called If God is Love, Don't Be a Jerk. Put simply, this is my litmus test for living. If I do what is being asked, am I attempting to be the embodiment of love? Or if I don't do it, am I a jerk? So, shall we gather at the river, the beautiful river? Yes, we'll gather at the river that flows from the throne of love. The words are uplifting and remind us that there is a place for all of us where we can come together, celebrate, mourn, worship, and heal. The river isn't an esoteric place in the afterlife, but rather is the practical beloved community made manifest in this one imperfect world. And if we attempt to unlock the power of covenantal relationships, I believe we just might find it.